Evolve ensure grittiness.
It starts with an attitude. We need swagger, okay? Regardless of what happens out there. Doesn't matter. Keep your swagger.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 5-Hole Fantasy Hockey Podcast. I'm your host today. Usually it's a we are, so I'm so set in my ways. But I'm your host today, TJ Branson. We are kicking off the Dynasty Series. As you can see over here on YouTube, we're joined by Tony Ferrari. As we do with every Dynasty Series, we're just bringing on a bunch of folks who know a lot more than us. And the list was not short, so we started off with Tony Ferrari, formerly of Dauber, so he knows like kind of what we're looking for. You know, we're the fantasy nerds, but we're going to keep this pretty hockey-oriented. We're going to talk about the draft class coming up, and we've got episodes lined up for the next couple weeks here. But Tony, man, how you been? What are you working on? Throw some plugs out there. What can people click on, listen to? What are you up to?
I've been good. It's the busiest time of the year, but my favorite time of year because it's also the time of year where I do less video now and less watching these guys because, well, one, they're not playing, but two, I've seen them a million times already, it feels like. So I know most of these guys like the back of my hand at this point. So it really is a fun time of year. And as for plugs and stuff, just go check out all my work at thehockeynews.com. I know we'll talk about a couple things there. And then all my Game Tape with Tony videos on Scouching's YouTube channel. So check out all that. It's where I do interviews with players and I break down their game with them, basically. We talk about some of their upbringing, how they got there, and then we break down some tape together and really get into the nitty gritty of how they see the ice when they're out there.
I got Scouch coming on Wednesday. I'm going to be in Dublin, Ireland, so I have to figure out the logistics behind the time change and stuff like that. Hopefully stay sober and be ready to go for Scouch. So always a pleasure to have you on, man. I appreciate you coming here. Let's get into it. So I want to start off with some more broad questions about the draft kind of as a whole. And first off, I kind of want to know, what does a year look like for you? Are you following teams around? I'm a flight attendant, so I know airport hotels maybe better than anybody. So it might seem glamorous on the surface, but I kind of want to get a behind the scenes look and get your take on that.
No, I'm really lucky with where I'm located. I'm in Windsor, Ontario, so I've got the OHL all around me. Whether it's Windsor, London, Sarnia's not that far. Even Oshawa and the Toronto-based teams, they're pretty close. And then you have a few teams in the USHL over in Michigan, and you have the NTDP right there. So it's a nice hub because with the NTDP right over in Michigan, you get a lot of international tournaments. You get a 4-nation or 5 nations almost every year. So you get to see the European players live and in person. The OHL players around here, you get to see kind of the team cycle in. If you want to see Brady Martin play for the Sioux, you just go, okay, when are they playing Windsor? And you pop over to the rink, and it's nice to be able to do that. And this year we're lucky enough to have Ontario host the CHL USA Prospect Challenge, is what they're calling it, I think, this year, where they saw the U18s for the US go up against a CHL All-Star team, basically. And I made it up to those games, and it was a ton of fun. You got to see a lot of those guys in person too. And it's, for me, the most difficult thing is seeing the guys out west and seeing the guys in the QMJHL, because quite frankly, there's just not as many opportunities for me to do that. Living a regular life as well, and being a dad and a husband and everything. So it's one of those things that you kind of deal with. But at the end of the day, you see all those guys on video, and when you're watching a bunch of games on video every day, it's easy to get a pretty good gauge for those guys. But that CHL Prospect Challenge was great to be able to see guys like Cam Schmidt in person, or Jackson Smith was one of the guys that I really loved seeing in person, because he's the guy that you watch on tape and you're like, he's kind of up and down, especially early in the season. And I thought from that point on, he had a great game there, and then he really leveled his game out throughout the season. So it's an interesting process. But yeah, it starts basically right after the previous draft class. So it's a fun process.
And there's not much of a down season for you guys. And I'm curious, do you have a bottle of Rip Van Winkle, a bottle of Lagavulin or something ready for you right after the draft? Kind of take a week to yourself. Are you doing anything exciting?
No, for me, it's I take a few days to myself, and me and my wife go do something fun, or we honestly veg on the couch if we can, or just anything that's not hockey, basically.
Yeah.
And then it's right back to it. Like my summer's filled up with, I do prospect pool profiles, basically, where I break down each team's prospect pool. It's 30 and 30, or now 32 and 32 series that I do on the hockeynews.com, where I go over the new additions from the draft, some of the guys that rose up the board, the depth charts, the key prospect, the sleeper prospect, the next man up, all those kind of things for each team. And it's a fun process because it allows me to refresh myself every single year on who's in each team's prospect pool. It allows me to kind of double check on some guys that I haven't seen in a couple of years, maybe, or I hadn't seen since the last time I did this. Because as much as I watch a ton of junior hockey, and as much as I watch players from all over the world, watching the guy from the 2022 draft class in 2025, it's not always the easiest thing for me to do because it's not really my focus. So that series kind of allows me to go, all right, let's check in on player X, and I go and watch a couple games of them real quick, and I'm like, oh, like they've really developed this area, or they're still the same player, and this is why they may struggle to get into the NHL or whatever it may be. So it's a fun process, but it's definitely a long process, and it keeps me busy throughout the summer, basically right up to the Hlinka. And then once the Hlinka gets here, it's full force ahead on the next draft class.
So your proximity to being in Ontario and whatnot, the NTDP, is there anything you could tell us about Dan Muse to kind of take a little shortcut here now that we have something outside of the prospect world, but hired in Pittsburgh? What kind of styles can we look forward to with him?
I think Dan Muse is a great coach. He's always been a guy that's been able to adapt to his team, and I think that's always the most important trait in a coach. So many times coaches come in and we're like, oh, he's a defensive coach and he's going to try to get his team to play defensively. And well, I think there's value in that. Or a guy that's like, oh, he's a run and gun guy, he's going to make this team run and gun. Understanding the strengths and weaknesses of your team is really important as a coach. And if you're a really highly defensive focused coach and you have this team that's run and gun, while they certainly need to take on some of those defensive traits, it's probably why they haven't been winning, and probably why you're the new coach on the block. But it's also really important to go, okay, we have a guy like Phil Kessel back in the day. I'm not going to ask Phil Kessel to back check that much. I'm not going to ask him to block shots. Like, I'm going to let him kind of do his thing and go score 35 goals. And I think Dan Muse, the coach, is really good at identifying what he has, where his strengths and weaknesses are on the roster, and really playing into those strengths and weaknesses. With the NTDP, that's a situation where it's really interesting because you have a team of guys for 2 years, they're U17, U18 year, and then you're flipping over and you have a new roster and new strengths, new weaknesses, and you have to adjust to that. And I think that's been a great situation for a lot of coaches coming up, is going through that NTDP program. And then with him going to Chicago and being with that Chicago Steel team, which I've joked many a times, they're the London Knights of the USHL. They really are a team that runs like a pro team. Their facilities are great. Everything I've heard about that team and the way the organizations run, whether it's been Ryan Smith at the helm or many other people, Noel Needham, that's a team that has always had a culture set in place, and they work like a pro team. So I think Dan Muse is going to be great for Pittsburgh. When he was hired, I was like, that's a great hire in my opinion.
Adaptability seems like nurture and nature at this point with the 2-year turnover and stuff. So we were talking a little bit before we went on air. You got an article coming out about your guys that you've kind of taken a liking to, hopping back into the 2025 draft class in here. Is it possible for you to stay objective? Do you find yourself like giving guys extra points when you're making your draft list because you found yourself liking them? And then I guess just to pull back the curtain, who are those guys? Who are your guys?
Yeah, it's an interesting process, and I talked about it in the article a little bit because it's tough to go, oh, I love the way this guy plays, and not put him at like number 3, even though like there's a reality where like he shouldn't be at number 3. For me, like my guys this year, Michael Meese is one of them, Carter Bear, Lyndon Lakovich. I love those guys. Down the board, there's a player out in Seattle named Mitesh Pakar. Not that one that was drafted by Buffalo, a new one, a forward, and he plays the game so smart, so intelligently, and you look for these guys that bring joy in your game when you're watching them, because this is a tedious process. Like when you're watching a draft class, like there are 25 to 30 guys that are good, and that doesn't fill up a first round even. So like you're ranking guys that aren't necessarily joyful to watch. They're not necessarily fun, but they're guys that are really effective, and you know that they'll play. It's an interesting process because you go, I love this guy, but realistically, he had 45 points in 60 games. I can't put him in the first round because even if he does make it to the NHL, he's going to be a guy I love on the fourth line or on the third line.
Yeah.
So the my guys thing is always fun because it's not about your top five usually. And I mentioned Michael Misa. He's been number one on my board all year. I've kind of been an outlier a little bit with Matthew Schaefer being there for most people, but Michael Misa has been number one on my board all year. And it's because I've watched this kid. I've talked to this kid. I've known this kid for a few years now. I know what he's gone through over the last few years and how he's developed through all that. And that's an advantage. And coincidentally enough, the other guy going for number one this year, Matthew Schaefer, I've talked to him since he was 14, 15 years old. I've known this kid for a long time too. So for me, it's like seeing two children of mine grow up almost because these are guys I've watched for so long. And choosing between them almost feels mean. But all year I've said they're kind of 1A, 1B for me. And it depends on who's drafting at the first overall pick. And that's who I'd go with. But with Michael Misa, he's just a guy that I think he's so intelligent. He's so skilled. He's so fast. He does everything you want to see from a top line center. And when you have a player do that, it's hard not to like him. And I love a complete player. Like I was a big Anton Lundell fan in his draft year. I had him higher than just about anybody. And he's turned out great. I mean, he absolutely ripped apart Toronto. He's ripped apart a few teams in the playoffs the last couple of years. And he's been a key piece to that Florida team. So it's really fun to see some of my guys turn out over the next few years, or over the last few years, sorry. Lucas Raymond, Moritz Seider, those are others on the list. And this year, Michael Misa is one of those guys, Carter Bear, Lyndon Lakovich, all guys that I think are going to be much better than maybe some people think.
So you said there's some boring guys. You want to call them out? We can clip farm here a little bit, get you on blast. I'm just joking. We don't have to.
Guys.
No. We don't have to do that. I'll
give you a few boring guys. Why not? I'll give you a boring guy that's one of my guys, actually. Blake Fiddler. I love Blake Fiddler. He's a guy that is just so unentertaining to watch at times. And it's
does it all right.
So perfect. Like, I watch him and I go, man, if you put him next to a Matthew Schaefer for the next 15 years, that's the perfect partner. Like, it really is, because where most people think of a defensive defenseman, and there's a few in this draft class, and they go, oh, this is a guy that just hits people, like blows them up, does all the physical things, and then you watch them deal with a one-on-one or a two-on-one, and he's either sliding on the ice on the stomach or he's getting walked and different things. And I'm like, yeah, but he hits guys, but he doesn't know how to play actual defense. And even if he does know how to play actual defense, so many times you have these guys that aren't able to make that first pass. With Blake Fiddler, he does everything so seamlessly. He'll hit, he'll throw big hits. He's a big boy. He shuts things down defensively, and then he's able to make that first pass and take the pressure off of that offensively gifted teammate. I think that's one of the most important things for a defensive defenseman to do. It's not sexy. It's not necessarily even fantasy relevant a lot of times, but a guy I think of is like TJ Brody in his prime. Just his ability to kind of make the play defensively and not have to go, okay, now I have to give it to my defensive partner. Now I have to give it to Giordano or Morgan Riley and let them move it up the ice. He's capable of doing it himself. And that's so important, I think. And it allows that offensive guy to actually be able to play his game fully.
Yeah, there might not be any flash. Really, I was just trying to like trap you in a like put some boring guys on blast, and then Anyway, let's move into some of these questions that we got. I got one here from Chud in the Discord. He's the wider question is, who are some of the risers and fallers? And Chud specifically wants to know about Brady Martin. Seems to be moving up the draft list a little bit. But if you could talk a little bit about Brady Martin, what's improving his stock like that, and just a couple other guys that you find, maybe since January that have gone way up or way down because of a couple good games or a stretch or whatever it may be.
Yeah, with Brady Martin, it's really interesting because he's a guy that I think his stock has gone up as we've gotten closer to playoff time. And his stock has continued to go up as Sam Bennett has absolutely terrorized every team he's played against. He plays that kind of game. He's a physical guy. He goes around running people. He really does just focus on playing that physical side of the game, and then he has a decent offensive side too as well. I think that's the thing with Brady Martin is you're not getting a Michael Misa offensive player. You're not getting a guy that can play with an Anton Frundell or a Victor Eklund or even a Lyndon Lakovic in terms of high-end skill. But you're getting this guy that really does go out there and not only give you everything he has, but he's going to take whatever the other team has as well. And I think that's the really important thing. Like Brady Martin is a player that, for me, it took me a while because I always side, like you mentioned it earlier, I come from Dauber. I side for the fantasy side of things. Like I always look at points. I want guys that can produce. And that doesn't necessarily mean they produce points in their current draft situation, right? A lot of players over in Europe are playing against men. So when they have 20 points in 40 games, you're like, it's not really that impressive. But you see the signs. Like Lucas Raymond is a perfect example of that. He was a guy that didn't produce a ton in his draft year, but everything was there to show you that he could. And with Brady Martin, everything is there to show you that he can be a perfectly capable complementary offensive player. But it's those extra things, the physicality, the willingness to crash the net. Like he talked about it earlier this at the combine this past week, where someone asked him like, well, who's the guy you look up to, and he talked about Matthew Nyes, Sam Bennett, those kind of guys, the guys that are going there, crash and bang, make your life miserable along the boards, and then also just take your goalie out with an elbow or something, right? That's the kind of player Brady Martin's going to be at the NHL level, and it's fun because he's a guy that brings that at a high level, and he's never going to cheat you for effort, that's for sure.
So the next one, I guess, is going to fit right in when you do that 32 and 32, when we start to look at like the depth charts after the fact, when we have a little bit of hindsight on our side. But before we get into the draft or anything, is there, how do I want to phrase this? Is there like a perfect situation, like, landing spot for somebody, or is there a worst case scenario where you could see, like, what I'm thinking is maybe Schaefer goes to Chicago, maybe he slips to 3 and he goes to Chicago, and then he's got all of a sudden Lev Shinov, maybe a Korchinski could be in that conversation for first quarterback on the power play, like compete like that. But if he goes to San Jose, it seems like the gate's already open for him there. Is there anything you see where it's like a perfect fit or the worst kind of fit? Like somebody gets in there and all of a sudden they're amongst, 5 or 6 other names that are all competing for the same job.
Well, what I'll say to start is I think whoever San Jose ends up with is in the perfect fit. Whether they go with
Yeah.
Schaefer or Misa at 2, whoever ends up being there for them really is the perfect player for them. With Schaefer, like you said, he's got that open, like Sam Dickinson's there, and Sam Dickinson's a very good player. But if he ends up being your kind of penalty kill guy and your second power play guy, great. Like you're not upset with that at all, because Schaefer will come in and really be a difference maker offensively for that team. He's the kind of defenseman that they don't yet have in their rebuild. They've got a lot of really good forwards, but their depth on the back end is a bit of an issue, and I think that's why Schaefer would fit there. If Schaefer ends up going number 1, great. You have the terror of the two-headed monster that is Macklin Celebrini and Michael Misa for the next 15 years, and you're going to be the envy of the NHL. It really will be horrible to play against San Jose in about 5 years when both of those guys are putting up anywhere between 80 and 90 points each as the top 2 centers. And then you get in trouble. Oh, we loaded them up on the top line and you have Misa playing on the wing or something. And it really would be a great situation for either of those guys. But looking at some other players, I think a guy like I look at where Boston is this year. They're a really interesting team because of where they are in the draft this year. And I look at a guy like Porter Martone and the kind of power and physicality that he plays with, and I think that he would be an awesome fit with Boston. I think his strength and power game really would continue that Boston archetype that they're starting to move away from a little bit, just because the core has moved on. A lot of the guys that they've drafted and developed and really brought them to being a championship level team every year have kind of gone. You have Pasternak, you have McAvoy, you have Lindholm, and that's kind of who you're building off of now. So I think Martone would be a great pick there. I look at Utah in the situation where they're at. Like I think they're in a great spot because they kind of like San Jose are in a spot to like look at who just falls and be jacked about it. If they get James Haggins, they get Anton Frundell. Maybe they get a little bit frisky and they go with a guy like Victor Eklund. endless possibilities for them as well. So I think the fits there's a ton of good fits in this draft class, and I think this year more than any, we're going to see teams lean towards the archetype that they want. They're going to lean towards the thing that they want to be in the future. If a team wants to leverage high-end skill, they're going to go with a Victor Eklund. Or if a team wants to leverage the endless motor, Carter Bear is right there. If they want size and skill, Lyndon Lakovich is right there. So there's a lot of players in this draft that are kind of interchangeable once you get outside that top 4 or 5, and it really is, I think, going to depend on where they fit within the teams that are drafting.
Porter Martone's I'm a Flyers fan, and I'm kind of hoping that he falls to us. And I guess I just have to ask, are there any gingers in the top 10? If there's any gingers, then, it's not going to be Porter Martone. They're just going to go for the ginger.
Yeah, there aren't any gingers in the top 10. I can't even really think of any gingers.
I think we're safe then.
In the top 20 or even in the draft, really. But
that's it. We're trading the pick.
Yeah, trade the pick. Go get a ginger in the 7th round or something. But no, honestly, like Porter Martone in Philly, like that's another one where they talk about bringing back the old Philly. You want to bring back the physicality. You want to bring back the Broad Street Bullies in a modern day sense, at least. Porter Martone will do that. Like he's the guy that I've looked at and I go, he's a Matthew Tkachuk light. He's a great power playmaker. I think everyone looks at power forwards and they go, well, he's going to drive the net and just jam stuff in front. He can do that. But he's also got a wicked shot from distance, and his playmaking with a guy on his back, I think, is really the strength of his game. That's what you see from Matthew Tkachuk. We've seen it in the last 3 cup final runs. Just his ability to kind of deal with physicality, get into an awkward position below the goal line or in the corner or wherever it may be, and then make a pass that you're like, I didn't even really see that being possible. Porter Martone has some of that in his game. I really think he's a guy that teams are starting to undervalue, because I almost feel like with him and James Hagan specifically, because they've been the guys that have been around for as long as they have, and they haven't had the injuries that Misa had last year or Schaefer's had this year. They've been overexposed a little bit. And I think that Hagens and Martone, they've gotten bumped down just because people have seen them so many times that now they're like, well, now this is an issue and that's an issue. And I look at a guy like Schaefer. Yeah, they're nitpicking. And I look at a guy like Schaefer or Misa, who I love both of them. And I'm like, yeah, like those guys also have some issues. So like if we're nitpicking, like you got to be fair to everybody.
So JB in the chat here has a question that I kind of have as well. So we'll do like a merged question here. He says like we've gotten a lot of defensemen in the last few years, but I'm curious, what does an aerial view of this draft class look like compared to years past and future in terms of composition, in terms of position, and I guess talent as a whole? How do you view this draft class versus the ones we've had the past few years?
Well, the last few years we've been a little bit spoiled in the players that we've gotten. I think back to that Connor Bedard draft in 23, and I go, man, like Adam Fantilli went 3rd. He would go first in a lot of drafts. Leo Carlson would go first in a lot of drafts. And Matvei Michkov fell, and there was outside reasons for that. And that guy's a terror. Like that, and I didn't even mention Connor Bedard in that, outside of saying it was his draft. Like that's the kind of draft that you set your standards to, and you go, man, I wish it was this every year. And unfortunately, it's not. I look at this draft class the way we kind of looked at, I don't want to say 2021, because I think there's a bit more top end talent than 2021, the Owen Power year.
Yeah.
But I look at this draft class similar to the way we look at 2017. You had Hischier and Nolan Patrick go first and second, and Patrick didn't work out for a multitude of off-ice reasons, with the injuries and the concussions and everything. But you had some really solid players come out of that draft. Nico Hischier is one of the most underrated players in the NHL. Then you had Cale Makar in Pettersson and Heiskanen. There's a lot of really solid players, like good impact players coming out of the draft, but they weren't the guys that anyone were really looking at and going, that's the first overall pick. And I think this year's draft, like maybe a guy like Lyndon Lakovich is that guy. Maybe a guy like Radim Mertka is that guy. Like there's so many players in this draft that are really intriguing, but there's an obvious glaring flaw, or there's a glaring issue. Roger McQueen is a guy that everyone's loved all year long. I've been a little bit lower on him all year long than most people. I've even had him as low as like 21 or 22 on my board. Right now he's in the mid-teens, but the injury is a real issue. A back injury for a player that's 6'6", and it's a back injury that is oftentimes reignited, reflared up by physical contact. And let's be honest, hockey's a physical sport, so that has to be a concern. But if his injury kind of works itself out and he gets a little bit quicker on his feet, the guy could be an absolute monster. So the way I look at this draft class is it's a really solid draft. It's not the 2023 draft. It's not the 2022 draft even. It might not even be last year's draft, but it's a draft that has a lot of players that could hit really high. And quite frankly, a lot of players that could absolutely blow their floor out. Like they could be a guy that never really makes it to the NHL. So it's a high ceiling, high floor draft, but it's a lot of risk to get to that ceiling, I think.
Got the cat on the desk here. Sorry. Yeah, this is going to be one, like 5 years in the future. We're going to look, or I guess even with Heischer, what are we, 8 years down the road? And it's to the point where, Makar might have went one. All right. Cat kind of ruined my train of thought here. Sorry, man. She was all over the desk here. All right, let's move into some of the like players. Or no, there's a question here from FH89. Curious about the goalies in this draft. Where do you find that like kind of where are they condensed? Are they like third round picks? Is there any high end talent this year? Is there anything that we should be looking out for, excited about?
It's really weird. I'll say that because this year's draft
sounds like goalies.
Yeah, right. Like it's a goalie draft. But there isn't an Askarov or a Wallstead or even a Drew Commesso, really. So it's an interesting year. I think Joshua Ravensbergen is big and he moves well, but I have my concerns because sometimes I watch him and I'm like, I just don't know if you're tracking the puck as well as you should be. And then on the other side of things, you have Jack Ivankovic, who I think is one of the most intelligent goalies in the draft, an absolute monster when you talk about his ability to kind of track play and read things and do everything like that way. But he is a bit smaller. He's 6 foot, and some teams have some issues with that, understandably. It's not often small goalies make it in the NHL, but a guy like Dustin Wolf is kind of proven that to be a little wrong if you can be truly that high-end player. And I think Jack Ivankovic has that ability. He really carried a Brampton Steelheads team this year. That was a good team, but they weren't a great team, and he helped them be a really solid team. Pyotr Andrenyov and Alexei Medvedev are two Russians. Medvedev plays in London, though. They're good goalies. I think this is a draft where you're looking at maybe a couple guys in the first and second, or in the second and third round, and then you're going to get a ton of late round goalies this year. A team is going to go, I saw this guy 3 times in Sweden, and he was fantastic every time. Let's draft him. Like maybe a team goes, Luve Herenstam was fantastic a few times internationally, and he's a guy maybe that we draft. But it really is kind of a crapshoot for goalies this year. There's no surefire number one. There's no surefire like even top 3 or 4. So it's going to be a lot of teams going, we like this guy because of this thing, or we like that guy because of this thing.
Seems like throwing darts a little bit later.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about Michael Misa and Matthew Schaefer. I want to kind of drill down on the New York Islanders, just because there's not much if anything, in their system as it is outside of Cole Yzerman. And last year, with Lou at the helm, Yzerman was a really strange pick to me, just because they've been so defense oriented, and that was the one major flaw in Yzerman's game that a lot of pundits were talking about, that he's all offense and like a John Tortorella nightmare kind of player.
Yeah.
The cupboard's bare, so it's hard to gauge where they're going to go, whether it's going to be Misa or Schaefer if they decide to draft on positional eligibility. They have a blank slate. So what do you think where do you see their headspace? Do you think they go Misa? Do you think they go Schaefer?
I really don't know, because I think there is a legitimate case for James Haggins here. The Islanders have had a hard time over the years, historically, of keeping their players. As much as they are in New York, and everyone wants to be in New York, they're not the Rangers. And I don't mean to say that disparagingly or to make fun of them, but it's similar to the way that everyone wants to be in LA in basketball, but if you're not playing for the Lakers, it's not LA necessarily, right? Like, unless you're Kawhi Leonard, you're not going to the Clippers willingly. It's an interesting situation with the Islanders, because they have lost a lot of guys over the years, and getting a guy who grew up an Islanders fan, who had season tickets at times, who is still to this day very vocally an Islanders fan, in James Haggins, and the drop off isn't that big. And the reality of the situation is Hagens came into the year as pretty close to the surefire number one. I think he came into the year and everyone was like the high skill, the speed, the kind of shiftiness of his game. It reminds you a lot of Jack Hughes. And Jack Hughes has become a fantastic NHLer. So I think he's in the conversation for number one for the Islanders because maybe the reason he didn't blow the doors off at the college level is because he just wasn't physically mature enough. We look at Jack Hughes and his first couple years in the NHL, he wasn't physically mature enough. He put up some highlights, he put up some good points, and Hagens did that at the college level, but you need to really kind of mature into your body to play at the pro level. And I think with Hagens, you give him another year at Boston College. You let him be the lead guy there now that Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault are gone, and you let him become that Hobey Baker candidate that he could be. So I think Hagens is a possibility. But if I'm the Islanders and I have the choice between Misa and Schaefer as well, I'm probably going with one of those two. I think it's tough, man. I've been asked this question a few times, and I change my answer almost every time. Because similar to the Sharks, like they could use both, really.
Yeah. Yep.
Yzerman's not a center. He's never going to be a center. He's always going to be a winger. So if you pair him with Misa, you have a guy that can really set him up and can score himself. So a goalie has to be honest. They can't cheat to Yzerman. And that's a really, really big trade I think that Yzerman's going to need. But you have a guy that can be this do-it-all kind of flashy, incredibly good in transition defenseman, and you take him. I think if the draft were today and I was the Islanders' new GM, I'd probably go with Matthew Schaefer just because I think it is a little bit harder to get a defenseman in this draft than it is to get a center. I think center is probably one of the deeper positions, weirdly enough, in this draft class. But that top-end defenseman, it really is Schaefer, and then a huge gap, and then like three guys fighting for number two.
So let's talk about the New York Islanders are kind of a unique case at this point because, and especially when it comes to Michael Misa, because I believe that, going back to the conversation we had pairing Misa with Celebrini, one would assume that Misa might be your 2C in San Jose behind Celebrini. On the island, do you think, is Michael Misa somebody that has first-line center possibility? Yeah. So I think my question is, like, is it better for us fantasy nerds, like, to see a Misa go somewhere like the New York Islanders because he has that first-line, outlook or the ceiling or whatever? There's no real glass ceiling to him. But then you also look at San Jose. He's got a ton of insulation. There's other players that are coming up at the same time. Will Smith, Eklund, all sorts of guys that, is it really a wash, like, depending where he goes?
Yeah, I think with Misa, he's going to find a way to produce anywhere he is, whether he's the first or second line center. He really is just that kind of player. If he's in San Jose, like, you're going to be able to build out two first lines realistically. Like, you have Eklund, you have Will Smith, and for Will Smith, it's great. You move him to the wing, and he never has to worry about playing defensively again in his life because he doesn't always do that. But he's able to produce offensively and makes magic. He's shown some chemistry with Celebrini. So then you're like, okay, we'll just bring Misa up. And, we have his junior teammate that he tore up this year in the OHL with Chernyshov coming. And, look at that, Quentin Musty. It's a great power forward to pair with those two. Like, you'd be able to realistically build two top lines there. On the island, I would be a little bit more curious because you have Barzal, who's a center, but he gets pushed to the wing sometimes. And you have an interesting kind of dynamic there. Does Barzal want to stay long-term with the way the Islanders may be trending if they decide, hey, like, we got the first overall pick, we lucked into this, let's really dive in on a rebuild and try to build forward. So even if Barzal does stay, I think Misa could be a guy that supplants him as the number one center and Barzal becomes one of the best number two centers in the NHL. But yeah, it's an interesting situation for the Islanders because I'm curious what the direction of this team is going to go now that they have new management coming in. Maybe Patrick Waugh is able to really unleash his full-out all-offense style that he's always kind of favored. It's going to be interesting moving forward because they have a lot changing, I think, on the island.
So Misa and Schaefer, neck and neck at number one, number two. I kind of want to get a pulse on where they rank up against some of the other guys that have gone 1 and 2, or Schaefer with the defensemen that might be like Dahlin, Makar, Heiskanen, the other like Owen Power, some of the other high defensemen that have gone, and then you got Misa and even Hagen's. Like if there's a kind of muddled top three, how do they rank up against the Celebrinis, Bedard, Slafkovsky? Going back to Lafreniere even. Where do you see their kind of fitting in that pecking order?
Well, I think with Schaefer, I don't think he's Cale Makar, or even like a Quinn Hughes guy. You compare him to a guy like Heiskanen, and maybe there's some similarities there. I think maybe leans a little bit more offensively, where Heiskanen leans a little bit more defensively. And then with Rasmus Dahlin, he's always the toughest one to gauge because every time I watch him, I go, that's one of the best three defensemen in the world. And then I look at the Buffalo Sabres and I go, but he's on the Buffalo Sabres. And it's really tough to gauge him. But I think you put Schaefer in that second tier, maybe at the bottom end of it, with Makar, Hughes, and some of those guys clearly ahead. As for Misa and even Hagens, I think Hagens is a step below Misa. But I think you put them with Celebrini and some of these first overall picks from the last few years. I think Celebrini's probably a little bit higher than Misa, maybe on the same level, higher than Hagens. Slafkovsky, I think you put below. Bedard higher. Fantilli and Carlson, I think you put Fantilli higher. Carlson probably on the same level. So you look at him and he's kind of like I think both of them are mid-level first overall picks, realistically. So you may not be getting the generational franchise talent, but you're getting a very, very good player that will change the future of your franchise.
Is there anybody that's NHL ready amongst this group? I guess the landing spot is probably going to determine a lot of it. Like you said, Hagens, was it, that is going back to college and could finish out. So that maybe that, removes him from the conversation. But is there anybody else that you see that could hop right in?
It's really tough because could a guy like Caleb Denoyer, who I have ranked a little bit lower than most people, like everyone has him in the top 10, even top 5 a lot now, could he walk onto an NHL third line and be a good complementary player, which is kind of the role I think he ends up playing at the NHL level, as a complementary guy, like the second best guy on a line? Yeah, I think he could probably do that next year, and it may not go super well, but he could do it. Misa, Schaefer could be NHLers next year, and they're going to have ups and downs, but I think they're as close to NHL ready as you can be without being NHL ready. I would love to see both of them ultimately take a year in the NCAA, go to college for a year, and take that step up, that the kind of mid-level between pro and in the OHL. But I make the joke all year that like Brady Martin's the guy that everyone's going to look at and go, that's NHL ready, because he's going to walk in, he's going to throw a bunch of hits, he's going to bring a bunch of energy. His fancy stats may look god awful, but he'll rack up a ton of hits. He'll get a few random goals and stuff. But realistically, if I'm looking at this draft class, I go, no one's NHL ready. I look at it the same way I looked at the 2021 class, where I looked at Owen Power and Beniers at the top, and I went, I don't know if I'd put any of these guys in the NHL day one, because it's just everyone has like an area to kind of take a step. Like Schaefer, I think, just needs to play more games. He needs to stay healthy, and it's not that any of his injuries have been these like long-term concerning injuries. It's just you keep getting injured, and something keeps happening, and goofy things, and like he ran into a post at the World Juniors, like not his fault, not an injury that's probably going to happen again to him, but like get healthy, play a season. That's why I think the college level for him would be awesome. With Misa, I'm like, he's kind of proven everything he has at the OHL level. So if you want to bring him to the NHL next year, you probably could. You need to shelter him. You need to kind of give him some veterans to lean on. But I think he could do it. So I wouldn't put anyone in NHL next year, but if you had to, I'd say probably Misa, maybe Martin as just a dude that you're letting run around and be crazy.
Let's zoom out a little bit past the bigger names of the front half of the first round and things like that. Is there anybody that you kind of think, going back to that 5-year conversation, if they correct one thing, that could wind up being steals? Any sleepers that you have that might be second or third round guys? High boom, high bust, I guess would be another way to put it. But who are those names that stick out for you?
I think one guy for me is Eric Nilsson, plays for Djurgården in Sweden. I think the biggest thing with him is he's about 35 pounds soaking wet, but he's 6 foot. He's listed at 154, but I don't think he's 154. That's very generous. And he's so smart, so intelligent. He reads the play so well, an excellent playmaker, really kind of sets the table for everyone else on the ice. And I think if he bulks up a bit and he gets a little stronger, you have a really solid player there this year. And I think it's funny. I think Scouch and I were the only two people to have him in the first round early in the year. He wasn't even on the central scouting list, if I'm not mistaken. And then now I think he's the 4th ranked player in Europe or 5th ranked player in Europe. So I think it's an interesting player that does he go on day 1? Maybe not. But I think he's going to go early on day 2 or into the 2nd or 3rd round and be a player that people really, really like. Another guy, I think, if he can battle through being a bit on the smaller side, Michael Sverchek is an absolute menace. The guy plays with incredible pace. He loves to just kind of push defenders onto their heels and make a difference that way. I think he's fantastic offensively. He brings a lot of effort defensively as well. So I think he's a really interesting player. Down the board a little bit more, LJ Mooney is a guy that I think he came into the year with a lot of hype. He injured his knee and disappeared off draft boards. And it makes sense because he's a 5'7" guy that plays an incredibly skilled game. But the thing that's different from him than a few of the other smaller guys that we've seen come through the draft over the last few years is this is a center-driven player. He is in the slot. That's where he lives. He wants to drive the net. He wants to be around the chaos, and he finds a way to always make great plays there. So I think if a team takes a chance on him, he's going to be a great guy to take a chance on out of the NTDP. A little bit more down the list, a guy like Sean Barnhill, he brings a lot of what I talked about with Blake Fiddler, where he plays a boring game, but all of the tools are there to have a little bit more to give. And I think he could be really interesting. Harry Nancy is a guy that I think you watch him in Owen Sound, and that's a really bad Owen Sound team, if we're putting it nicely. And he is chaos, but in a controlled way. He is constantly creating something. He's constantly doing something on the ice that drives positive results. And if he had anyone around him that was able to kind of just advance it one step further, like if he had that chain connecting player, then I think there'd be a lot more points on the board for him. So he's a guy that I think deeper in the draft, someone's going to get a really good player. And there's a lot of players like that in this year's draft, I think, and it's a fun one.
So before, I got a couple fan submitted questions through the Discord, but I want to know, like, maybe we already talked that these guys aren't going to be NHL ready from this 24 or 25 draft class, but think now, like, who's making the jump, and I want to know who your way too early 2025-26 Calder class, what that looks like.
Ooh, the Calder class for next year. It's interesting. I think Demidov jumps to the top of that list pretty easily. I think he's a guy that is going to be absolutely fantastic. It's going to be tough to knock him off the top of the pedestal. I think, did Ryan Leonard play enough? He didn't play enough games. He's still Calder eligible, right?
That'll be a fun one, yeah.
So he's going to be a
20 some odd games, I think.
Yeah, so if he's Calder eligible, he's a guy that I think will be absolutely a handful for teams to play against, because we really only saw flashes of it this year. And I think that's the really interesting thing. He only played 9 games, so he is perfectly in the range of being called eligible next year. His teammate Gabe Perreault will be really interesting depending on where he gets in the lineup in New York. But for me, the top 2 names have to be Demidov and Ryan Leonard. The high skill, the way Demidov changed the Montreal Canadiens' outlook offensively every time he was on the ice really is just such a difference-making factor. Like we talked this year about Lane Hudson and how good he was.
Oh yeah,
Demidov does that for their forward group. He really does. They've needed a difference maker. I think Demidov has the highest potential of any player they've had in the system up front since Guy Carbonneau. I really genuinely believe that he's an absolute menace to deal with offensively. So he's a guy that I think is the favorite. Ryan Leonard is right there though, because for all the times we talk about him being a bull in a china shop, he's a guy that can barrel over a defender. This is a guy that has some really high-end skill when he needs it. I go back to his draft year, and every year I think of this goal when I talk about Ryan Leonard is he goes over the blue line, just trucks the defender with the puck on the stick, just absolutely blows him up. The defender goes flying into the opposite face-off circle, and then the other defender comes over to help, and he just dangles him by putting it through his legs, walking around him like a windmill deacon in the NHL video games, and then backhand roof on the goalie. Like, just so skilled, while also bullying guys on the way to doing it. So I think he's a guy that I think is going to fit right in with that Washington team next year and be a really key piece for that team.
So the questions that I have here, I have 3 questions specifically. We talked a lot about James Higgins, but Tim A on the Discord, he's curious, like, why is his draft position kind of mixed? It seems like all your colleagues, the consensus might have him, high up or down. Is he more contentious? Do you find like a kind of a rift amongst his projections?
Well, I think at the end of the day, a lot of people that do this publicly, and I'm not trash talking anyone, but they rely on reports from other people. Like watching college hockey is not the easiest thing to do, if I'm being completely honest with you. Even some of the video programs I have access to don't have every single game they play. So it's tough to get views on college players. So reading through some of the reports that I've seen from people, I'm like, oh, like, you're basing all of this on last year. Like, no physicality, doesn't play defensively. And those are the 2 areas of his game I think have absolutely grown the most this year. Like, he's going in there, he's throwing hits. He may not be the most effective body checker right now, but he's showing that he can be functional physically. And I think that's the most important thing for a skilled guy like him. His defensive game has grown a lot this year. He's really kind of filled in the gaps where I think Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard both have some defensive gaps, specifically Gabe Perreault. And James Higgins was able to fill those gaps. So I think he's grown a lot this year. But I think at the end of the day, he's been overexposed too, because we've seen him at the U18s the last couple of years. We've seen him in his U17 year with the NTDP. He jumped up to the U18 team. In his U18 year, he was dominant for that NTDP team. So we've seen him while we're scouting other draft classes, and now we're like, oh, James Higgins again. Like, we're almost bored of him a little bit. It really is that overexposure. So I have him at 3rd on my board right now, and I don't really see that changing, because while I don't think he's in the same tier as that top 2 of Schaefer and Misa, I don't necessarily see him in the same tier as the guys behind him, like Frendell, Eklund, Martone, even Bear and Lakovich. So he's kind of in this quasi, like, if you're ranking Misa and Martone, or Misa and Schaefer at number 1A and 1B, you still kind of have Higgins listed at number 2, because those guys really are a pair at the top rather than a surefire number 1.
And then the tier 3 starts right behind him. I'm noticing there's a lot of Swedes in this draft, eh?
It's a good year for Sweden.
Oh my goodness!
Thank goodness, because Finland decided we're opting out of this draft. There's like 3 good Finns, and even the good ones will be drafted late, because a guy like Max Vestergaard is, I love him. He's a good player. He's a guy that I have ranked, but he's not a guy that I think everyone's going to have ranked. And then the Finnish class in general, there's just not much to give, and they've been struggling for a few years, if we're being honest. So having a lot of Swedes this year has been a good thing, because it really is a deep year for Swedes.
Said from the Discord is interested to hear your take on Bill Zanin. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but Bill Zanin.
Bill Zanin. I've heard it pronounced both ways by announcers in the queue, but this kid is a fun player. I love Bill Zanin. He's a guy that coming into the year, I was like, is he going to be able to develop either side of his offensive game as a playmaker or a goal scorer? And he took a big step as both, if I'm being honest. But his playmaking specifically is where I really find the value. And he's a guy that plays with all of the energy, all of the pace, all of the drive that you want to see from a player. He really does. He's a guy that, like, everyone jokes, forecheck, backcheck, paycheck. Bill Zanin embodies forecheck, backcheck, paycheck. Like, he's a guy that's going to get it in below the goal line, make a lot of plays there, and then go to the net and make plays happen around the net. He plays with a lot of speed. I know some people have kind of harped on him for his skating technique. And I'm like, yeah, his technique isn't the prettiest. Like, he's not the most gorgeous skater, but, like, he's blowing by guys. So like you work on the technique a little bit, and he's going to blow by guys even more. So the speed is not an issue. The technique may be a little bit wonky, but that's really the biggest flaw in his game is the technical skating. So I love Bill Zahn, and I think he's a really undervalued guy. For reference, he's currently at number 15 on my board, which I think is among the higher rankings for him. So yeah, draft Bill Zahn and be happy.
The last player-specific one here is from Robert De Neurodivergent. So I guess a Robert De Niro play. Very nice. He'd want to know about Owen Griffin and your take on this guy.
Owen Griffin's an interesting player because I don't know what he's going to be at the next level. And that's the thing with him. He plays for the Oshawa Generals, really good player there. But I look at him and I go, is this going to be a really good junior player, or is this going to be a guy that plays well on the lower end of an NHL lineup? Because he's a good defensive player. I think his game is pretty detailed there. He understands where to be in what positions he needs to be in. Always has a stick in the lane and that kind of thing. But he's not necessarily like he's a 5'10" guy, but he plays like he's 6'2". And I think that's sometimes an issue for some of these smaller guys that want to play that way. Is he gets in there physically, he wins battles, he does some things that way. He has some skill, but it's more like drive to the net and he can clean up the garbage skill. And when you're 5'10", that's a little harder to do, especially when you're not the highest end at that. So Owen Griffin's a guy that I like, and he's certainly a guy I would draft. But he's a guy that at the end of the year when my top 100 comes out, he's probably going to be in the honorable mentions. And it's just because I watch other guys and I go, there's more there. Owen Griffin certainly deserves to get drafted, and he'll probably get drafted right around 100 in this third, fourth round. But you could get a player easily that fits on your third and fourth line and just kind of plays a good, solid role and you don't have to worry about. Or you could get a guy that never really plays. And I think that's kind of the concern with him.
Last question I got for you, Tony, is I always like to kind of dip my toes into the next draft class. What can you tell us about the guys at the top? I think this is the one where, Gavin McKenna is kind of really standing out. So, his name's bouncing around. Is there anybody else we should kind of keep tabs on at the top?
This draft class is really good. And it's going to be a refreshing step up from this year, because this year we have, like I said, a lot of really solid guys, but you don't have like a true surefire guy in the way Gavin McKenna is. Gavin McKenna is going to be the first round pick. I don't think anyone's going to question it. And the way he dominated in the WHL this year, it was so fun to watch. But there's a lot of guys. Viggo Bjork's really good. I think a lot of people love a guy like Ethan Belchitz, who plays in here in Windsor. I've seen him play a million times by now. Big, solid guy. Shoots the puck hard. I still wonder about his feet. His feet are a bit of an issue, but when you're 6'5" and 230 pounds, teams tend to forgive the feet a little bit. Ryan Rubrick is a guy that went fourth overall in the OHL, if I'm not mistaken. Really solid player for the Niagara Ice Dogs. Put up 87 points this year. Keaton Verhoff is a defenseman for the Victoria Royals. I think he's got a chance to be one of the top defenders. Xavier Villeneuve, small defender out in QMJHL. And I think if anyone's ever followed my work, they know the QMJHL is not my favorite league in the world, and I am generally not kind to it. But next year, Xavier Villeneuve is going to be pushing near the top of that draft, and I'm going to have a hard time giving him the QMJHL effect, because he doesn't play like a typical QMJHLer. He's not strictly this like free-flowing, slow, low-paced guy. He pushes and makes plays. It's a really good draft next year. There's a lot of guys that are really interesting. I just brought up my list now. Even a guy like Mathis Preston, Ivar Stenberg is one of my favorite.
Wait! You already have a list going for next year?
Oh, you have to have a list.
Oh my God, you got to take a break, dude.
It's not a ranking by any means. It's mostly just a collection of names that I kind of have guys like, oh, this is like a first round pick so far for next year. But
okay, all right.
It really is. It's an interesting year. It's certainly a year that coming into this year, I was like, okay, I know I'm going to love Misa. I know I'm going to love Schaefer. I know I'm going to love Martone. Who else? And there's been guys that have emerged, but it's kind of been there have been times this year where it's been a bit of a slog. Next year's draft class, I'm already going, oh man, I can't wait to watch Ivor Stenberg just torch guys. I can't wait to watch Gavin McKenna ruin lives, probably at the NCAA level. Because let's be honest, he has nothing to prove at the WHL level at this point. So it's a much funner draft class next year, at least in terms of excitement factor.
No, I'm looking forward to that one, man. One more time, Tony, thank you so much for hanging out with us here in the middle of the day. Almost had my coffee, feeling good. One more time, let everybody know where they can find you. You're on Twitter at the Tony Ferrari, over at the Hockey News. What else can people? I keep refreshing to see this My Guys article pop up. Maybe tomorrow, I guess. But
yeah, I think it might be Monday morning. But yeah, definitely check out my work at the Hockey News. Now that the draft is basically right around the corner, everything is going to be kicking up. Don't be shocked to see an article just about every day coming out or close to it. I'll have my final rankings next week, if I'm not mistaken. Honestly, I don't know the dates right now. I never know the dates at this time of year. So, but definitely keep an eye out for that. And then my Game Tape with Tony series over on Scouching's YouTube. There's a ton of interviews there with everyone from Michael Misa to Matthew Schaefer, Kishan Aitchison, who's a big name. There's a lot of players in this draft class that were really fun to talk to. Watch the Lyndon Lakovich one. That's probably one of my favorite ones from this year. I can't talk enough about him.
Oh, that's awesome, man. All right, that's going to cue the outro music here. Thank you, everybody who's listening. We got a couple episodes coming up later in. I think I'm going to drop this one tomorrow, give it a little touch-up and post and things like that, Tony. But, yeah, we got Sebastian Hayes coming up, Will Scouch right around the corner. A couple other names coming down the pipeline. Tony, thank you one more time so much for hanging out with us, guy. Always a great time. And to everybody out there listening, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you. Still got to figure out this StreamYard stuff. There we go.
Adios, turd nuggets.